questions after his lecture. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and tell you a little bit about Michael. Michael Barera has been the Assistant Archivist in Michigan with a BA in History from 2012 and an MSI in Archives and Records Management from 2014. Michael has extensive presenting experience, including presentations at or for the Rare Book and Manuscript Section, Association of College and Research Libraries, the Society of American Archivists, the Society of Southwest Archivists, the Texas Center for Working Class Studies, and the Texas Library Association. Today, Michael will give a newly reimagined presentation of Milwaukee, a city of three rivers. And now I'll turn it over to Michael.
All right, thank you, Julie. Let me go ahead and share my slides. All right, can everyone see my slides? Okay. All right, thank you again, Julie. As she said, my name is Michael Barera. I am the Assistant Archivist and Digitization Specialist here at the Milwaukee County Historical Society. And today it is my pleasure to present to you Milwaukee, City of Three Rivers. Over the next 45 minutes to an hour, I will talk about the rivers themselves, their impact on Milwaukee's history, and their place in the city today. But first, a few acknowledgements. I'd like to thank Ben Barera for curating the photographs used in the Milwaukee Where the Waters Meet exhibit, which ran here at MCHS until the summer of 2022. I've incorporated many of those photos into this presentation. I would also like to thank John Gerda for his book, Milwaukee, a City Built on Water, the Encyclopedia of Milwaukee, which is produced and made available by the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and the previous versions of this presentation on Milwaukee's rivers created and presented by my colleagues Steve Schaffer and Juliet Hills. These were the major sources for the content of my talk today. Milwaukee's three rivers are fundamental to the very identity of the city. When the Milwaukee People's Flag, pictured, was created in 2016, the winning design used the reflection of the sun rising over the lake, the three light blue bars on the flag, to symbolize the city's three rivers, the Milwaukee, Menomonee, and Kinnickinnic, as well as its original three settlements, Juneautown, Kilburntown, and Walker's Point. This presentation has been illustrated by photographs and other images from the collections of the Milwaukee County Historical Society Research Library, where I work. MCHS is located in the former Second Ward Savings Bank at the corner of Martin Luther King Jr. Drive and Kilbourne Avenue in downtown Milwaukee. A couple of the photos in this presentation were my own personal photographs, and one is also from National Geographic magazine. Pictured here is a map created by pioneering Wisconsin scientist and naturalist Increase Lapham's 1836 to 1852 surveys of the Milwaukee area. The map illustrates the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menomonee mounds in the area. It also provides a good early settler depiction of the Milwaukee, Menomonee, and Kinnickinnic Rivers, the relations to each other and to Lake Michigan. Where the Waters Meet is one of the most common translations of the name Milwaukee into English, along with the good land. My presentation on Milwaukee's rivers consists of 5 thematic sections: hydrography, transportation, recreation, industry and commerce, and decline and restoration. Aside from the thematic approach being my personal favorite way to approach topics such as our rivers, this design was inspired by John Gerda's thematic treatment in his book, Milwaukee, a City Built on Water, as well as the companion Milwaukee PBS television program of the same name. The first section is hydrography, a word that comes from the ancient Greek terms for water, hydro, and writing or description, graphy. Hydrography is the science of measuring and describing the physical features of bodies of water, including rivers. Therefore, this section focuses on the physical nature and historical origins of the Milwaukee, Menomonee, and Kinnickinnic Rivers. The Milwaukee River, like the Menomonee, Kinnickinnic, and other rivers in the area, was formed roughly 12,000 years ago when the Laurentide ice sheet began to retreat. Literally born from a glacier, the Milwaukee River flows 104 miles from its headwaters in Fond du Lac County to its mouth on the shore of Lake Michigan here in Milwaukee. Near Campbellsport, about 60 miles northwest of Milwaukee, multiple tributaries combine to form the Milwaukee River. The river then flows east through Kewaskum, Barton, and West Bend, zigzags its way through Newburgh, Wabaca, and Fredonia, and then turns south to flow through Saukville, Grafton, Thanesville, and Glendale before reaching Milwaukee city limits. Once in Milwaukee, the river divides River West from the Lower East Side and then separates the original white settlements of Juneautown from Kilburntown. Juneautown now being Easttown and Kilburntown Westtown, both in downtown Milwaukee. Near its mouth, both the Menomonee and Kinnickinnic rivers flow into the Milwaukee, and it ultimately empties into the lake at the port of Milwaukee. The name Milwaukee is translated differently from various Native American languages, but the most common translations into English are the good land and where the waters meet. This aerial photograph of the Milwaukee River, with City Hall clearly visible in the upper center, is from the Ralph Cooley papers at MCHS. Near the center of the photo, note the lake freighter docked at the United Street Station. At the time, it was a power plant, but today it's home to the Milwaukee Repertory Theater. Well into the 20th century, this portion of the Milwaukee River was frequented by commercial vessels. Today, traffic this far up the river consists almost entirely of recreational boats and kayaks. The Menomonee River flows approximately 32 miles from its headwaters, which are near to both Germantown in Washington County and Mequon in Ozaukee County. It then passes through Menomonee Falls, downtown Wauwatosa, and the Menomonee River Valley in west central Milwaukee. It ultimately empties into the Milwaukee River at the exact point where Kilburntown to the northwest, Juneautown to the northeast, and Walker's Point to the south all border each other. The name Menomonee is derived from the Algonquin word menomon, a staple crop known as wild rice in English. This photo is an early view of the Menomonee River, likely from the mid-19th century before it became heavily industrialized. Channelization, earth moving, heavy industrialization, and pollution have all substantially changed the nature of the river. The Kinnickinnic River, commonly known as the KK, flows approximately 10 miles from its headwaters near Milwaukee Mitchell International Airport to where it empties into the Milwaukee River just west of the Inner Harbor. The Milwaukee River then in turn empties into Lake Michigan shortly after this confluence. Kinnickinnic literally means that which is mixed in Algonquin, in reference to a mixture made from tobacco and the inner bark of dogwood or willow trees that was used for smoking. This photo of the Kinnickinnic River in 1977 is taken from the HOAN Bridge looking southwest. A railroad bridge, tugboat, and commercial and industrial buildings in the background all testify to the industrialization and economic importance of the river. The second section of this presentation is transportation. It focuses primarily on how the Milwaukee, Menomonee, and Kinnickinnic rivers have historically functioned and continue to function as vital pieces of our collective transportation infrastructure. It also discusses the bridges over the rivers. Humans have lived in the area of modern-day Milwaukee since the retreat of the glaciers that physically shaped this part of the state roughly 12,000 years ago. The earliest of these native peoples lived in prehistoric times and left no written record. They were succeeded by Native American nations familiar in southeastern Wisconsin today: the Potawatomi, Menomonee, Ho-Chunk or Winnebago, Ojibwe, Odawa, Sauk, and Fox. Native village sites earthen mounds, and the legacy of native place names in this area all give testimony to the relationship that local Native Americans have had with the rivers and the lake for millennia. In 1916, archaeologist Charles Brown identified 7 different Native American settlements in central Milwaukee alone, all within 2 miles of the current site of City Hall. Every single one was located close to water, with 5 built on the high ground along the Menomonee Valley. One native settlement, known as Lime Ridge, stood at the intersection of present-day 24th Street and Clybourne Street, and had 250 dwellings as late as 1836, making it larger or comparable in size to many white frontier settlements of the era. John Gerda describes these Native American nations as quote unquote people of the canoe because they use canoes and the rivers for transportation between settlements on the lake and those further inland. In addition to providing a means of transportation, the birds, fish, and plants in the river, especially the Menomonee River, also provided Native peoples with both food and supplies. None of these was more important than wild rice, known as Menomonee in the Algonquin family of languages. This image is an early drawing of Native Americans harvesting wild rice in a river from a canoe. It most likely depicts the Menomonee River. Sailing ships and later steamships were a frequent sight on Milwaukee's rivers in the 19th century. On one day in 1873, North Point lightkeeper Daniel Green recorded 175 vessels passing him, either into or out of the Milwaukee River, 146 schooners and 29 steamers. The advantage of Milwaukee's strategic location was heralded by the very first issue of the Milwaukee Sentinel, published on June 27, 1837, which read, "Milwaukee Bay affords the best and safest harbor on Lake Michigan. 300 vessels might lay at anchor with ease and safety." But Milwaukee faced competition from other cities with rivers and natural harbors in the area, especially Chicago, Kenosha, and Racine. In the early 19th century, before the development of railroads, sailing was the prime mode of transportation for both white settlement and commerce. While the first white Wisconsinites arrived in the southwestern portion of the state via the Mississippi River in the 1820s, the Great Lakes would ultimately prove to be the easiest and most popular water route to and from Wisconsin, especially after the completion of the Erie Canal in 1825. Steamers would eventually come to dominate Great Lakes shipping, but in the mid to late 19th century, schooners were still popular with those without enough money for a more expensive ticket on a faster steamer. John Gerda described shipping lanes as quote unquote lifelines for Milwaukee. In addition to bringing passengers, often new settlers, to the city, the rivers and their connection to the lake were also key in the export of commercial goods from the city. This photo shows a tugboat towing a schooner on the Milwaukee River near its confluence with the Menomonee River. Note the Mackey Building, formerly the Grain Exchange and Chamber of Commerce building, at the extreme left of the skyline. To the right are buildings in the historic Third Ward, where many old warehouses have now been adapted into apartments, condominiums, shops, and restaurants. Milwaukee has the best natural harbor on the western shore of Lake Michigan, thanks to it having both the broadest bay and the deepest river in the region. However, the sandbar near the entrance to the harbor was perhaps the city's largest barrier to growth. This sandbar caused the river to flow about half a mile further south, extending its length and making commercial activity on it more difficult. In the 1830s, vessels had to anchor a quarter of a mile from the coast and send their passengers and cargo ashore via small ferries. By the end of the decade, the local community was constantly petitioning the United States Congress for monetary aid to improve the harbor. Milwaukee's first cargo pier was erected in 1843 using private funds, although it was quickly destroyed in winter storms. Undeterred, the city built 3 more such piers by 1848, but they provided only a temporary solution. Also in 1843, Congress had finally appropriated funds, but only a modest $30,000 for dredging and piers at the natural mouth of the river. Meanwhile, local support was building for a quote unquote straight cut, a channel cut through the sandbar at a narrow point about a half-mile north of the natural mouth of the river. This map from 1853 depicts the design of the straight cut. Without substantial federal aid, in 1854, Milwaukee citizens voted for a local tax to create the straight cut. It was completed in 1857 at the cost of nearly $450,000, well over budget. Regardless of the cost, its completion substantially increased Milwaukee's ability to compete for lake traffic with other cities in the region, especially Chicago. This success was bittersweet, however, as in 1852, the first railroad arrived in Chicago. While the populations and commercial output of Chicago and Milwaukee remained comparable from 1835 to 1850, railroads would quickly allow Chicago to assert itself as the most populous city and largest commercial center in the Midwest. Lake freighters did not just stay confined to the harbor. By the mid-19th century, the Milwaukee River had been dredged. Docks, warehouses, and grain elevators were built along its banks as far as 2 miles upstream from its mouth. While today it is virtually unheard of to see anything larger than an Edelweiss Cruises or a Milwaukee Boat Line tour boat on the Milwaukee River, it remained a working river well into the 20th century. Coal was delivered to power plants along the river, including those that are now the Powerhouse Theater on Wells Street, home of the Repertory Theater, and the Spectrum Building, further north on McKinley Avenue. Freighters also served the Schlitz Brewery complex in what is now the primarily residential area known as the Beer Line. While the Milwaukee River is now almost exclusively recreational in nature, the Kinnickinnic and Menomonee rivers remain working rivers due to the persistence of industry around the harbor and in the Menomonee River Valley. This photo shows the famous freighter Edmund Fitzgerald on the Milwaukee River near its confluence with the Kinnickinnic River, heading toward the mouth of the harbor and Lake Michigan, toward the east. Owned by Northwestern Mutual, Milwaukee was the Edmund Fitzgerald's home port. This photo is looking west, toward the stern of the ship, with the heart of downtown to the right of this view. The Schrader Hotel, now Hilton Hotel, and the Wisconsin Tower are visible near the center of the image, just to the left of the ship's smokestack, while the Wisconsin Gas Building and Northwestern Mutual headquarters are at the extreme right. While most passenger ships on the river today are the various tour boats, passenger ships connecting Milwaukee with other cities on the Great Lakes frequented its rivers well into the 20th century. Most notably, the Georgian Bay Line's SS North American and SS South American sailed into and out of Milwaukee on commercial passenger voyages into the 1960s. Milwaukee also has a rich history of Lake Michigan ferries and, increasingly, cruise ships making ports of call here. But with one notable exception, those have used docks that are either in the harbor or directly on Lake Michigan that are not part of the river system, chiefly Pier Wisconsin by Discovery World and the South Shore location used by the Lake Express Ferry. That one exception is the 665-foot-long Viking Octantis, which began sailing the Great Lakes in 2022 and is too large for any ship berths in Milwaukee, except for the freight docks on the Kinnickinnic River at Jones Island. This means the Octantis must briefly transit the Milwaukee and Kinnickinnic rivers and travel under the HOAN Bridge, which it clears by only about 5 feet when arriving in and departing from Milwaukee. This photo of the SS South American on the Milwaukee River is taken from one of the bridges, most likely the State Street Bridge. This photo is from the Callis family collection and is undated, but is likely from the 1960s. Launched in 1914, the South American remained in service as a passenger ship on the Great Lakes until 1967. Note City Hall and the Wisconsin Bell Building, now AT&T Building, in the background. Like the rivers themselves, the bridges that span them have been essential to the development of transportation in Milwaukee. In 1836, the first bridge was built in the city across the Menomonee River near what is now 2nd Street. Prior to this, residents relied on private ferries, and before that, row your own boats. Funded by Byron Kilbourne, founder of Kilbourne Town, the city's first bridge was designed to draw people and commerce away from Solomon Juneau's pioneering settlement on the east side. Kilbourne refused to align the streets in Westtown with those already laid out in Easttown, resulting in unusual angles for many of the downtown bridges across the Milwaukee River. This remains, to this day, one legacy of the rivalry from the period before the creation of the city of Milwaukee in 1846, when 3 separate settlements existed in the central part of the modern-day city, Walker's Point, in addition to Juneautown and Kilbourne Town. Tensions came to a head during the Bridge War of 1845, during which violent sectarian mobs representing both Kilbourne Town and Juneautown destroyed 3 bridges in an effort to reduce the other side's transportation mobility and potential for economic growth. Early bridges were built of wood, but these were eventually replaced by concrete, iron, and steel bridges. By 1913, there were already 54 bridges, including viaducts, in the city, including 16 over the Milwaukee River, 15 over the Kinnickinnic River, and 8 over the Menomonee River. In 2011, there were 179 bridges in the city, 21 of which were movable, 13 bascule bridges, named for the French word for seesaw because of how they open, and 8 vertical lift bridges. At least 1 railroad swing bridge over the Menomonee River just south of Milwaukee Intermodal Station is also in operating condition. However, perhaps the most famous swing bridge in the city, the Milwaukee River Bridge in the 3rd Ward, relatively near to the harbor entrance, remains inoperable. In 2022, there were still 13 operating bascule bridges in the city and a total of 20 operating movable bridges in all, making Milwaukee 2nd in the entire country in the number of movable bridges, trailing only Chicago. This photo by Diane Buck shows the Michigan Street Bridge over the Milwaukee River. Looking north, Gimbel's is visible on the left, and the Marine Bank Plaza, now Chase Tower, is on the right. Note the Pabst building still standing near the center of the image, although its distinctive crown is already gone. Also note the condition of the river itself, which appears to be full of algae. Likely the most famous and certainly the most visible of the bridges in Milwaukee is the HOAN Bridge, which carries the I-794 freeway over the Milwaukee River at the mouth of the harbor. Spanning the entirety of Jones Island as well, the HOAN Bridge provides a critical connection between downtown Milwaukee and the Bayview neighborhood and suburbs further south. Construction on the bridge began in 1970 and generated considerable controversy, especially from the growing urbanist freeway revolt movement that opposed building a freeway in the heart of a city or along its coastline. For comparison, note the removal of the Park East Freeway in the early 2000s, and ongoing discussion about the conversion of the east-west portion of I-794 that divides Easttown from the 3rd Ward into an at-grade boulevard. The HOAN Bridge was completed in 1974, but it was maligned as the bridge to nowhere until the construction of on and off ramps that connected it to city streets in 1977. The stub eastern end of I-794, just before the lakefront, then still under construction, became famous as the filming location for the climatic scene in which the Illinois Nazis crash off a bridge in the 1980 film The Blues Brothers. This photo by Eddie Daniel shows the HOAN Bridge at sunrise with a fisherman in the foreground. This section, Recreation, discusses recreation on the Milwaukee River, primarily from a historical perspective. The warmth and calm conditions of the Milwaukee River were and remain its primary recreational advantages over Lake Michigan. Conceived by John Gerda as a quote-unquote sort of in-town up north, the portion of the river upstream from the former North Avenue Dam was especially popular from the 1870s through the 1920s. The dam, originally built by Byron Kilbourne for his ultimately failed Milwaukee and Rock River Canal project, essentially became the boundary between the recreationally oriented river to the north and the industrially and commercially oriented river to the south. In 1870, a beer garden called Pleasant Valley was established on the Milwaukee River at Concordia Avenue. In 1893, Blatz bought it and added a dance hall, promenade, and stables. Sometimes called Blatz Park, it featured a view of the river and quote-unquote meals and refreshments at all hours, according to a 1907 menu. Today, Pleasant Valley Park sits on the site of this former resort. Just half a mile from Pleasant Valley, a rustic resort called Ludemans on the River was established in 1872. It changed names numerous times, becoming Wonderland and finally Ravenna Park. It ultimately evolved into a true amusement park, complete with a carousel, fun houses, a roller coaster, and a water slide, and it could draw thousands of patrons a day during the summer. This photo depicts Wonderland, likely around the turn of the 20th century. Note the roller coaster at the right of the image. Today, Wonderland or Ravenna Park is now Hubbard Park in Shorewood. Gordon Park, located at Humboldt Avenue and Locust Street, was also a major recreation destination. It featured a permanent bathhouse, diving boards, and water slides. However, its beach was polluted by sewage runoff into the river during overflow caused by storms. And in 1937, Milwaukee County took possession of the park and closed the beach, replacing it with a pool. On Independence Day in 1896, Shoot the Chutes opened just north of William Beckstein's swimming school to considerable fanfare. Riders took floating wooden cars down the tracked incline to a pool just north of the North Avenue Dam. Other popular activities along the river included fishing, picnicking, and sunbathing. The 1890s were the peak of popularity for recreation on the Milwaukee River. Before Wisconsin Dells became a major destination, the upper river served a similar role for Milwaukeeans. Swimming has traditionally been the most common of the common of the water-related recreational activities in Milwaukee. Due to the industrialized river downstream of the North Avenue Dam being polluted, swimming was concentrated north of the dam, like other recreation activity on the water. In 1856, German Bohemian immigrant Julius Rohn opened the first swimming school in Milwaukee, which was also one of the first in the country. Giving instructions in German, Rohn and his staff may have taught as many as 10,000 children and adults how to swim by 1900. Rohn's swimming establishment catered to people across class lines, and as many as 2,000 people would swim at his establishment on certain summer days. This photo is of Rohn's swimming school. Rohn's ice house is also visible in the background. In the 1860s, Pachkowski's swimming school was built just north of Pleasant Street. By the late 19th century, there were more swimming schools on the Milwaukee River, including those run by William Beckstein, as well as David Whitaker and his son, George. By the turn of the 20th century, the river was home to a mix of private swimming schools and public bathhouses. Ultimately, though, concerns about pollution in the river hastened the demise of swimming in it. And by the mid-20th century, this historic Milwaukeean pastime had largely been replaced by swimming pools. Fishing has a long history in the Milwaukee area, going back to Native Americans. Recreational fishing increased in popularity during the late 19th and early 20th century, fueled mostly by the increased leisure time won by many workers of that era. Recreational fishing took many forms, including fishing from bridges and piers, from the shore, on boats, by wading into the rivers, and ice fishing on the frozen river during the winters. This photo shows three boys walking down a pier while holding fishing rods. Note the line of people on the left side of the pier sitting and fishing. Some recreational fishing was competitive, while others fished for pleasure. Historian John G. Gregory notes that fishing along the length of the Milwaukee River was popular until the 1870s, when river pollution began to make it less enjoyable and less desirable. After that point, recreational fishing occurred almost exclusively north of the North Avenue Dam, mirroring the extent of swimming on the river. Boating has also long been popular on the Milwaukee River. In the 1870s, the Milwaukee Boat Club maintained a boathouse just upstream from North Avenue. It sponsored regattas on the river that ran between North Avenue and Locust Street. By 1890, 3 additional rowing clubs were active on that stretch of the river. In 1894, the Milwaukee Rowing Club was established, which has been rowing on the Milwaukee River for over a century and is still active today. Rowboats were commonly seen on the river in the 19th century, although by the 1890s, they were surpassed in popularity by canoes, which were popular among both young men and young women. Much of this recreational boating was done to travel between the various beer gardens and parks along the upper river. This photo shows rowboats in Mitchell Park. Ice skating on the frozen Milwaukee River was common, with the bathhouse at Gordon Park serving as a warming house in the winter. In the 19-teens and 1920s, the frozen river around Gordon Park hosted winter carnivals with ice hockey, figure skating, speed skating, sledding, and even ski jumping. This photo shows one of those skating carnivals in 1919. Most of the skating was between North Avenue and Capitol Drive, which are about 2 miles apart. Skating was especially popular on winter evenings and Sunday afternoons. On New Year's Day in 1895, a group of 10 young employees of the Ferry and Kloss architectural firm skated nearly 20 miles from the North Avenue Dam to Thanesville. 3 of them also skated the river for the return trip, while the other 7 took a train back to Milwaukee. Pickup hockey games played on the frozen river were also common until the removal of the North Avenue Dam in the 1990s. Industry and commerce comprise a huge part of the history of Milwaukee, and the rivers played a key role in enabling and sustaining such industrial and commercial activity. Water-powered industry in Milwaukee was made possible by damming the rivers to create artificial drops in the water level, thus using gravity to harness the power of the river. Lumber, grain milling, textile weaving, and paper making were some of the early water-driven industries in the city. The earliest mills to be developed were sawmills for sawing lumber. Shortly thereafter, grist mills gained popularity, which were mostly used for milling wheat. In 1834, Daniel Bigelow built the first sawmill in Milwaukee, which was also the first water-powered industry of any kind in the city. Bigelow's sawmill was built by a wooden dam on the Milwaukee River near present-day North Humboldt Avenue. Outside of the city, numerous settlements in Milwaukee County were initially centered on an early mill, including Hales Corners, South Milwaukee, and Wauwatosa, which was originally called Hart's Mills. This photo is of the Wauwatosa Mills. Most famously, in 1839, Byron Kilbourne began construction of the Milwaukee and Rock River Canal. He intended the canal to connect Kilbourne Town with the Rock River at Fort Atkinson. However, all that was ever built was an earthen dam at North Avenue and 1¼ miles of the canal, which never functioned for its intended purpose of transportation. However, it became a source of water power around which emerged the first true industrial area in Milwaukee. Flour mills were the first industry to blossom in the area. E.B. Walcott and John Anderson established the first flour mill in Milwaukee in 1844, and there were 5 on the aborted canal by 1849. Other industries to pop up along the water power, as the area was simply known, included sawmills, foundries, tanneries, a woolen mill, and a paper mill. By the 1860s, however, most of the industries that had been using water power had shifted to steam power. Kilbourne's failed canal was eventually paved over in the 1880s, and today its remains lie beneath Commerce Street. Brewing has long been the most celebrated of Milwaukee's industries, and it is also highly dependent on water. Milwaukee's climate was crucial to the early success of brewing in the city as well, as until the development of practical mechanical refrigeration in the 1880s, Ice was needed to keep beer cool during the fermentation process. In Milwaukee, both the Milwaukee and Menomonee rivers were used as sources for this ice. Barley and hops were also grown locally in Wisconsin in the 19th century, further enabling brewing to gain a foothold locally. The first brewery in Milwaukee, Lake Brewery, was founded by Welsh immigrants in 1840, just north of the present-day Summerfest grounds. The first German brewery in the city was opened by Hermann Reutelshofer in Walker's Point in 1841. By 1856, there were 26 breweries in Milwaukee, almost all of them owned and operated by German immigrants. As they all produced less than 3,000 barrels of beer annually, they would have been considered microbreweries by modern standards. These breweries were often family-owned, and many served beer only in their immediate neighborhoods, often at nearby beer halls, saloons, and restaurants. By 1868, the largest brewery in Milwaukee was Best, which was established by Philip Best in 1844. Frederick Pabst married into the family in 1862, and by 1889, he had renamed the company for himself. The brewery that August Krug had founded in 1849 was likewise married into by Joseph Schlitz, who took over operations in 1856. Schlitz moved the company to the site of Kilbourne's Old Canal on the Milwaukee River in 1870, the site of modern-day Schlitz Park. This drawing is of the Schlitz Brewery. Valentine Blatz also married into his business, originally the City Brewery of John Braun, which was founded in 1846. Blatz was located on the east side of the Milwaukee River, across from Pabst and Schlitz. Finally, Frederick Miller bought a non-operational brewery on the western fringe of Milwaukee in 1855, but in the 19th century, it was smaller than the three other members of what eventually became the Big Four. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 created an opportunity for Milwaukee breweries, as it destroyed almost half of Chicago's brewing industry. Chicago's loss became Milwaukee's gain, and by 1887, the Cream City was producing 5 times more beer per capita than the Windy City. Milwaukee's breweries looked increasingly to national markets, in part due to more and better railroad connections. By 1874, Pabst had become the largest brewer in the country. Between 1856 and 1885, consolidation had shrunk the number of the city's breweries from 26 to 9. However, between 1865 and 1885, a roughly comparable time span, total annual output of beer exploded from 59,000 barrels to 1.1 million. In 1890, for the first and only time in Milwaukee history, brewing was the largest and most lucrative industry in the city. It also spawned a host of support industries, such as bottlers, cooperages, glass blowers, and malting houses. In the 20th century, brewing in Milwaukee survived prohibition, international competition, the banning of tied houses, establishments that served only one brand of beer, and numerous consolidations and closings. Pabst acquired Blatz in 1958, Schlitz sold out to Stroh's of Detroit in 1982 and ceased operations in Milwaukee, and Pabst likewise ended operations in the city in 1996. This left Miller as the last surviving of the Big Four, although it is now part of a conglomerate, Molson Coors. In the late 20th century, craft brewing revitalized the beer industry in Milwaukee, with Sprecher, established in 1985, and Lakefront, 1987, among the most notable new microbreweries in the city. The first tannery in Milwaukee was established in 1842 by Daniel Phelps, a Yankee from the eastern United States. Like brewing, tanning soon came to be dominated by German immigrants. The early tanneries in the city were considered merchant manufacturer shops, which typically employed less than 5 people. In 1853, Guido Pfister and Frederick Vogel established the Pfister and Vogel Leather Company, building their plant on 6th Street in the Menomonee Valley. This photo shows the Pfister Tannery. Note the employees visible in front of the building and the Menomonee River behind it. Other firms such as Gallen, Trostel, and Gebhardt joined them. And by 1890, Milwaukee was the second largest leather producer in the world. The city's location near water, forests, and farms proved beneficial to the tanning industry in Milwaukee. as they respectively provided transportation and processing power, hemlock trees, and cowhides and sheepskins, all essential for tanning. Railroad connections, the depletion of tan bark in the eastern United States, and government contracts were also major reasons for the development of tanneries in the city. Two distinct tannery districts developed in Milwaukee, one on the Milwaukee River and the other in the Menomonee Valley. Both were served by schooners on the rivers. The last great boom for local tanning occurred during World War I, when the demand for leather grew so high that it resulted in the development of synthetic substitutes. Ultimately, tanning remained a major industry in Milwaukee until the 1920s, when it became much less significant due to a combination of shrinking demand, development of cheaper tanning processes, and increased foreign competition. Manufacturing ultimately surpassed milling, brewing, tanning, meatpacking, and brickmaking to become the predominant industry in Milwaukee by the early 20th century. By 1900, the city was proclaiming itself as quote unquote, the machine shop of the world. The Milwaukee Iron Company began operating its mill in Bayview, at the time a suburb and not yet neighborhood of Milwaukee, in 1868. It was the second largest producer of railroad rails in the country. Like the industries that preceded it, manufacturing developed on or near rivers because of the transportation advantages they provided. This photo shows industrial buildings near the North Avenue Dam on the Milwaukee River. Ultimately, because of both its river and railroad connections, the Menomonee Valley became the preferred location for most manufacturing in the city. In 1869, the Menomonee Improvement Company began landfill work in the valley, reducing bluffs surrounding the area and using the earth from them to build solid ground on what had previously been marshland. By 1900, more than 1,400 acres of land in the Menomonee Valley had been built via this process. The canals and rail infrastructure built in the area were what John Gerda called, quote unquote, perhaps the best transportation infrastructure in the state. Emerging alongside the meatpacking plants, lumber mills, and tanneries that already existed in the valley were a host of new manufacturing businesses, including foundries, machine shops, and stamping works. While hundreds of smaller employers made their home in the valley, it also hosted major companies that gained widespread recognition, including Chain Belt, Falk, Harnisch-Fager, and the Milwaukee Road Railroad. Working class neighborhoods developed on both the north and south sides of the valley. Ultimately, the Menomonee Valley became more than just the greatest industrial area in the state. It rivaled the greatest industrial areas in the world at the time. All of them, perhaps unsurprisingly, were likewise located along rivers: the Cuyahoga in Cleveland, the Monongahela in Pittsburgh, and the Ruhr in Western Germany. In 1854, James Monroe Jones began building ships on what is today called Jones Island in his honor, the peninsula south of the mouth of the Milwaukee River. Jones could build a schooner, the most popular type of vessel for sailing the lakes in the late 19th century, from start to finish in just 60 days. Briefly, his shipyard was the largest in the city. In 1856, Jones built the first propeller-driven ship in Milwaukee, the Allegheny. Both the strong demand for new ships and the easy access to nearby timber helped create a viable shipbuilding industry in Milwaukee. However, the financial panic of 1857 and a major storm in 1858 wiped out his shipyard, and Jones himself left the city for Detroit in 1861. However, shipbuilding remained a major industry in Milwaukee for decades to come. In the latter half of the 19th century, Wolf and Davidson was the largest shipbuilder in the city. By 1900, 114 of the schooners on the Great Lakes had been built in Milwaukee, many of them at Wolf and Davidson. This photo shows a schooner under construction at Wolf and Davidson. The final section of my presentation focuses on both the challenges caused by the decline of the rivers, as well as the opportunities granted by the restoration, both historically and today. The needs for restoration and causes of decline are various, including industrial pollution and human waste. Restoration is perhaps the most important word with which to describe the rivers today. By the late 19th century, All three major rivers in Milwaukee had been contaminated. The Kinnickinnic was full of wastewater and garbage. The Menomonee was contaminated mostly with industrial pollution, the worst of it from tanneries and stockyards. And the Milwaukee contained a mix of human and animal feces along with industrial waste. This photo shows the discharge of the We Energies Valley power plant in the Menomonee River. In 1869, Milwaukee began building a new sewer system that discharged into the Milwaukee River, with an 1874 headline in the Milwaukee Sentinel reading, quote unquote, "Milwaukee River to be made one vast sewer." The revulsive results were documented in the national press as well, with Harper's Monthly writing in 1881 that the Milwaukee River was a currentless and yellowish murky stream with water like oil and an odor combined of the effluvia of 100 sewers. In 1879, a Blue Ribbon Commission tasked with fixing the polluted rivers returned the obvious answer. The only true solution was to stop dumping waste in the rivers in the first place. An aborted attempt was made to build a system of quote unquote interceptor sewers along the Milwaukee and Menomonee rivers, which would have kept waste out of the rivers, but then dumped it untreated into Lake Michigan. In 1880, a state law made pollution a crime, but its enforcement was largely ineffective. The next major idea the city had was to flush the Milwaukee River with fresh water from Lake Michigan. First conceived in 1879, in 1888, a tunnel was completed that took water from the lake shore at a Cream City brick flushing station on the lake shore, now Collectivo on the lakefront, pictured, to the river just below the North Avenue Dam. While still flushing pollution directly into Lake Michigan, the new system did result in the river becoming cleaner than it had been in recent memory. Despite this improvement, the sewage being expelled into the lake could be pushed into Milwaukee's water intake at North Point, depending on the direction of the wind. The result was an increase in waterborne illnesses in the late 19th century, including typhoid fever and intestinal flu. In 1907, a similar flushing station for the Kinnickinnic River was built at Chase Avenue. In 1909, the state forced Milwaukee to start taking steps to solve its water crisis. This included a special commission appointed by the city that recommended sewage treatment and filtration. In 1910, the Socialist Party scored its first major political victory in Milwaukee when Emil Seidel won a landslide victory in the mayoral election. Derided by more ideological socialists as quote unquote sewer socialists due to their focus on public works and not purity of doctrine, the Milwaukee Socialists even had a plank of their 1910 party platform directly addressed to wastewater. Quote unquote, "The city shall cease to throw sewerage into the lake, thereby creating epidemics of typhoid fever and many other diseases. Instead, the city shall utilize its garbage and water matter in a modern scientific manner and make it the source of fertility and wealth." This photo is a collage of portraits of the Socialist Party's first elected officials in Milwaukee in 1904. The Socialists had initiated a process that would take 15 years to accomplish. The Milwaukee Sewerage Commission, which was chartered by the state in 1913, decided upon the activated sludge process, at the time state of the art, as its preferred approach to wastewater treatment in 1915. The activated sludge approach mixes sewage with both microorganisms and air, resulting in the microbes consuming pollutants before dying. In 1918, the Sewerage Commission began constructing a full-scale treatment plant on Jones Island, pictured in this photo at sunset with the HOAN Bridge and the Milwaukee skyline in the background. The plant became operational in 1925, resulting in over 95% of bacteria and over 90% of solids being successfully removed from Milwaukee sewage, which was considered remarkable for the time. As of 2022, the treated wastewater returned to Lake Michigan from the Jones Island facility is actually cleaner than the lake water itself. Created as a byproduct of the activated sludge process is the fertilizer called MILORGANITE, which is short for Milwaukee organic nitrogen. It is created by drying the dead microorganisms used to treat the wastewater. Its sale also provides financial return to the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District, MMSD, the successor to the Sewerage Commission. The fertilizer's especially high nitrogen content, due in part to the waste products of the brewing industry in the city, makes for a superior fertilizer that is in high demand in lawn care applications, including on golf courses, since it was created in 1925. This photo shows an undated earlier aerial view of the wastewater treatment plant on Jones Island. Like the history of wastewater treatment in Milwaukee, in the early 20th century, the socialists were also the first to envision promenades along the city's rivers. By the late 1920s, the first such promenade had been built along Gimbel's department store, pictured, on the west bank of the Milwaukee River between Wisconsin Avenue and Michigan Street. In a 1968 study during Henry Meyer's tenure as mayor, by which point the Marine Bank Plaza promenade also had been built across from Gimbel's, a clearer vision of a future Riverwalk was articulated. That document stated, the Milwaukee River could be bordered with walkways, which by day offer occasional sitting spots in the shade of trees or shelters of quaint architectural design, shop and store windows facing these walkways, and by night, a gaily lit promenade highlighting adjacent buildings. In 1969, the first portion of the modern Riverwalk was created a few blocks upstream, both along the Performing Arts Center, now the Marcus Center, and the newly created Pere Marquette Park, which are directly across the river from each other. In 1983, a unified vision for the Riverwalk was unveiled, a $4 million project built around the 6 blocks between State and Clybourne Streets. As the Milwaukee Journal observed at the time, this modest beginning to the present-day Riverwalk network had the advantages of being able to be built in stages, not requiring major construction or demolition, and also not requiring a large amount of funding at any one time. During the administration of Mayor John Norquist from 1988 to 2003, the Riverwalk became one of the city's top priorities, growing to nearly 2 miles of pedestrian paths on both sides of the Milwaukee River. The Riverwalk now connects bars, restaurants, boat and kayak docks, and public art, most notably the bronze fonts and a statue of Gertie the Duck. It has also helped attract investors for new commercial activity along the river, especially in the form of apartments, condominiums, and restaurants. This photo shows the Milwaukee Riverwalk in downtown Milwaukee, looking north up the Milwaukee River from the Wisconsin Avenue Bridge. The Kilburn Avenue Bridge is visible in the background. Note the canoeists and recreational boaters on the river, as well as the kayak dock on the left. The present-day Riverwalk consists of 3 segments. The southernmost portion along the historic 3rd Ward, which was completed in 2004, pictured here, the central original segment along the river downtown, and the northern Beer Line B segment along a former freight rail line between East Pleasant Street and North Humboldt Avenue. Between 1989 and 2009, the Riverwalk also hosted an annual festival called River Splash. The cleanup of the rivers and the development of the Riverwalk have been principal contributors to a housing boom on the rivers. In the 1990s, the Milwaukee River began to see strong residential growth, a mix of young urban professionals drawn to the heart of the city, as well as empty nesters moving in from the suburbs. The architecture varies along the river, from renovated and adaptively reused warehouses in the 3rd Ward to modern purpose-built apartments and condominiums along Commerce Street, near the northern reaches of the Riverwalk. The Commerce Street area is especially noteworthy because it was the site of Byron Kilbourne's abortive canal that evolved into the water power. Perhaps no other area in the city has shifted so completely from industrial use to residential use, and it is largely because of the improved health of the river. This photo shows upscale apartments and condominiums on the Milwaukee River near Commerce Street. It is taken along from the Riverwalk on the west bank of the river along Schlitz Park looking northeast. The Pleasant Street Bridge is visible at the extreme left of the photo. In 1990, the North Avenue Dam was opened, and in 1997, it was removed. This allowed the entire Milwaukee River to flow freely for the first time in 150 years. Combined with the cleaner water in the river, this had a positive impact on fish and other aquatic life. After falling to a low of just 8 species of fish above the North Avenue Dam, there are now more than 40 species in the upper river. The removal of the dam has also allowed fish to swim from Lake Michigan all the way across Milwaukee County, and some even cross the county line into Ozaukee County. Today, there are salmon, bass, and walleye in the river, among other species prized by fishers. This photo shows the fish lab at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee's School of Freshwater Sciences. In 2003, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources began to stock the Milwaukee River with hatchery-raised sturgeon. In the words of John Gerda, quote unquote, "The program is a profound act of faith in the future, one that would have been unthinkable before recent improvements in water quality." At Sturgeon Fest every fall, Milwaukee area children now release sturgeon fingerlings into the river. This photo by Eddie Daniel shows a fisherman catching and releasing a fish. Milwaukee still has its share of challenges, but the restoration of its rivers and their increasingly recreational use are major achievements and reason for optimism into the future. While the city remains one of the most racially segregated in the country, the rivers, like the Milwaukee County parks, have truly become a gathering place for all Milwaukeeans. On a warm summer night, the river attracts people of all races, ages, genders, musical tastes, and ideas of a good time. It is one of the most democratic parts of the city, as well as one of its greatest assets. This photo by Eddie Daniel shows a group of people from multiple walks of life kayaking together on the Milwaukee River at Lincoln Park. In its Travel Best of the World 2023 list, National Geographic magazine named Milwaukee one of its top 25 travel destinations in the world, and one of only 4 in the United States. This was in no small part due to Milwaukee's rivers and the Riverwalk, as demonstrated by this photo of the 3rd Ward that was selected to accompany Milwaukee's entry on that list. The photo shows the historic 3rd Ward with the Milwaukee River in the foreground, looking northeast. Note the AT&T building visible at the far left of the image. National Geographic calls Milwaukee, quote unquote, a vibrant Great Lakes city that celebrates its cultural community as much as its breweries, and notes that it quote unquote, combines a blue-collar, back-thumping energy with a close-knit creative community that's turning heads beyond the Great Lakes. Thank you.
To make me the host again.
All right, thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed Michael's lecture. Does anyone have any questions? You can share your questions in the chat if you're interested. We'll wait and see if anybody has any questions before we sign off. We do want to let everyone know that we did record this today, and we're going to put it up on our Facebook site this afternoon. We did have some technical errors, and a lot of people weren't able to attend, so we want to make it available to everybody. Does anybody have any questions before you go? Okay, well, I just want to remind you that we have another Lunch and Learn coming up on March 10th at 12 o'clock. The topic for that lecture is going to be Milwaukee founders. And we'll send out the link in mid-February for that. And look for the lecture on Facebook this afternoon. Thanks, Michael, for your time today, and thanks everybody for attending.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining. Have a great afternoon.